All right. Good evening, all.
Good evening.
As
Indeed.
everybody plows in, quick audio check.
Copy.
Roger, Roger. Nobody knows those old airplane references.
You're of a certain vintage, you do. Yes.
Perfect.
As long as we don't hear pan or mayday.
That's right. Actually, a good family friend we're meeting up with this weekend. We're taking the boys to the baseball game, and he's a pilot with Air Canada. So yeah, I get all the inside tracks and funny stories when my flight's delayed. All right, we're gonna get rolling in about 30 seconds here. Give everybody a chance to log in. Good evening, all. We've got some special guests this evening.
We'll try to be special, Eric.
You already are. Well, I didn't think we'd make
Is
it on time.
there a chat thing that can you see it or questions in that?
Okay. Good point for housekeeping. For those of you that joining, the Q&A is open and the chat should be open as well. Feel free to post in. Let us know where you're coming from this evening. We've got clients all the way from joining Mark here in Vancouver, Steve in Toronto, and me somewhere in between. So let us know in the chat. We've got Q&A open, guys. We have two of 30-year veterans and experts in the space to really help make sure we've got a great sense of trends, growth, and what the heck is going on with this crazy dental world we're living in.
Wow, we have a really important guest.
See some familiar names already.
I do. I see one of our reps' daughters.
Fantastic. Well, great. Well, on that note, guys, just to kick things off, first of all, thank you, everybody, for joining. We do these webinars. This is our first Sinclair National webinar. Thank you for joining. We know we've set it up hopefully for a time for those of you just wrapping up in the practice, right, and running from chair side. Thank you for joining us at 5. And certainly for those that it's not too late, feel free to grab a nice glass of red wine and enjoy a good conversation here across the board. Just to introduce some of the incredible panelists we have here this evening. Mark C. Wilson. I've never walked around a trade show with someone that knew someone else so much, right? In terms of, Mark, 32 years in the business, in the dental business, by far have seen it all, done it all, and has been absolutely a fantastic advocate for the practice services and everything we've been doing to help Sinclair clients from coast to coast. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Eric.
And of course, Steve Jeffries, branch manager of Toronto. We wanted to get a great cross-section coast to coast, 30 years in the business, all the way from software, financing, to branch management. Steve Jeffrey, thank you, sir. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Appreciate the warm welcome.
Yeah. So let's have some fun. Again, guys, there's been no shortage of webinars through the pandemic or otherwise. Tonight is more about just some good conversation, some great Q&A. And again, if you can, just throw that into a Q&A, throw in a quick chat, and also feel free to let us know. We'll handle the questions if they're on target. If not, what we'll do is we'll just hold them off towards the end. All right. What I wanted to do was to start off with 3 key numbers. As we talk about growth, as we talk about the lease, there's pitfalls, and there's 3 numbers that I want you to be keenly aware of. Number 1, right? As you look forward, 85% of dentists have a lease that can prevent them from ever selling their practice. And if you've seen any of the Roy Corp emails lately, or a lot of the tier 3 components, you'll see that the lease in many cases has become one of the number 1 reasons why a practice deal fails or dies at the 11th hour, is because of the lease, and more specifically the assignment and subletting provision, which many of you may not be aware of, but the landlord, right, in many cases can decline or prevent the assignment of that lease, which is usually one of the two conditions of sale. Right? This is a big one, and we'll touch on this more, again, empowerment, data, etc. Right? How do we help save some money here? Right? And roughly over half of you are overpaying in rent. And that can come from a few reasons. Maybe it was a sweetheart deal you had when you got a bunch of tenant improvement allowance, and whoops, right? Now suddenly it's been going up by 4 or 5% per year over the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? And then what you may find shocking is that, and this is becoming bigger and bigger these days, especially with higher interest rates and inflationary markets, is 80% of landlords can structure the leases to give them the right to a percentage of your practice sale proceeds. And if you talk to any practice broker, they have recent examples of these components. So the purpose of today really, again, is to help leverage some great market leaders throughout North America with Steve and Mark, and to help ensure that we're learning about the lease, and not to become leasing experts or otherwise, but just to take a different perspective, and more importantly, know how you can help to protect yourself and structure a lease to help make sure that we're managing for growth, right? We're handling profit and growing with profitability, right? And making sure that we're putting some protective force fields around those eventual practice sale proceeds. So what I'll do here is, we've got some great polls. So what I'll do here is I'll pull up some specific polls for us just to get a sense of the room. As I do that, Mark, how would you describe Cirrus for those that know you for years, but maybe have not been introduced to us before?
I guess the way I've been describing Cirrus to most people is to put it in dental terms. When you've got a really tough case, you send it to a specialist. Well, your lease is the toughest case you're ever going to come up against, and you aren't qualified to do it. You need to send it to a specialist, and Cirrus is the specialist I think you should send it to. That's basically in the shortest possible way what I think about Cirrus.
Yeah. And Steve, you've used us for years. You've well aware of all the clients you've referred, etc. You know, again, to a doctor that you've met or sitting down with over dinner, etc., and talking about their business or buying or building a second location. Who are we? What do we do? And how do we assist your clients over the years?
I would just say it like this, Eric. You are someone they need to have on their team. And it's funny because they have no idea that your service exists and yet how badly they need it. Because the folks that are helping them, whether it be their broker or their real estate lawyer or whatever, they are not specialized in the space you're in, and ultimately they just don't have the knowledge that you possess and you're able to share with the clients.
Perfect. I appreciate it, guys. Look, we're unique. We're the only healthcare specialized dental and tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of our kind in North America. This is it. This is all we do. We were founded in Western Canada 29 years ago by some doctors that partnered with some real estate experts. And since then, we've done over 13,000 of these over North America. So we've got an incredible team internally. One of our lease negotiators has been with us over 20 years. Scott, many of you have seen him or seen his 5-star Google reviews, etc. Truly incredible. He's probably done over 2,000 dental deals himself. Multiple attorneys on staff. And again, we're just doing dental deals all day, every day, which gives us a great perspective across the board. The market, let's talk about what we're seeing today as it pertains to the market and the data. So as we touch on that, we want to touch on the lease. We want to touch on how we can protect some profitability. We want to talk about, should I expand, renovate, relocate, or buy another practice? And also top negotiation tips and tricks, right, on how to help to maximize your success. And then also, how do we help to minimize some of those $100,000 traps in the lease? And we'll also have lots of time for some Q&A towards the end. What I wanted to do here is to dig in a little bit to the market and the market data. So maybe to start things off, as we look sort of from one coast to the other, Mark, this is just some of the data, but more importantly, Mark, what are you seeing across the board, right? You've got dozens and dozens of new starts. You've got hundreds of clients that you've helped build out their practices over the years. What are you seeing on the best coast, if you will?
Well, as you know, probably out here on the West Coast, our biggest challenge is actually just finding a space, and just finding a space that isn't. You don't have to look at this map very hard to see that it's a pretty dense packed area right around, the Vancouver core and that. But to find a good space and an adequate space in a good location is our biggest challenge. The rents here are very high. Steve's going to, in Toronto, the same. But to get that good space so that you can actually build a profitable practice in the long term. And we all know that one thing that landlords love about dentists, once you build a dental office on a site, you really don't move it. And you stay there and you pay a lot of rent for a long time. So I know you guys have been a massive help in us finding spaces that otherwise I'm not sure we would have ever found.
So one of the key components here is the data. And yeah, we were just playing with this a little bit before, but you want to know what you've got ahead of you. And right now, just looking at the Vancouver market, there's over 3,674 spaces. And you might think, hey, Eric, that's great, but hang on a second, right? Is it really suitable for dental, etc.? So just to share the sort of the tip of the iceberg, but we can literally then filter in whatever sort of filters, criteria, etc., that are important. Most doctors ground floor retail. So if we add ground floor retail 12 to 3 or 4 or 5,000 square feet, if it's demisable, well, suddenly now, okay, great. And we want to be in a shopping plaza. Well, now we've got 100 spaces. So we've got the quick ability to look through. So again, just making sure we're focused on the lease, but we got to find a space first. So again, it's a great opportunity to do these types of calls to find out about the market. Even if we look at one individual location, we can quickly then see market conditions to demographic information, 3D models, all sorts of great components, brochures to help ensure that, look, if this is something that you've been thinking about the second location or a build out or buying or even just renewing your lease, the data is there to make sure you're not overpaying, and that when the landlord says, no, we're doing 35 a square foot or 50 a square foot, right? We've got quantifiable data, not only from the other hundreds of dental deals we might have done close by, right? But also for any of the other commercial real estate data. So again, as we look into market conditions, as we look into even things such as demographics, so at a quick look, right, have the data. So this is a great conversation to have with, right, your local Sinclair sales consultant, and look at these, right? What does population look like in your particular area for that building? Household growth, population by occupation. And then if you're still seeing my screen, it's again a growth curve, right? What do those growth rates look like within a 2, 5, and 10, right? Now, your guess is as good as mine, and your crystal ball is as good as mine, but this does give some good demographic data based on this, proprietary and very expensive software that we utilize, right? But we do include that as part of our conversations and helping clients. And you can get, have some fun, get all the way into sort of market data and market sizes based on health and personal care, and see what the market looks like, and making sure, again, you're making the right decisions with the right amount of data. So, one of the components here, to share and be aware of is that, look, we've got 95 million square feet that we have access to, 4.6 million properties, right? And again, we want to be, we're your advocate, we're your advisor, we're on your shoulder, right? We're not commission driven, and we're here to help make sure that you're getting the best location, right, with the best lease. So let's touch on that, guys. From your perspective, Steve, I'll start with you first, right? A lease, you've seen them all for years. You've seen what works and what doesn't work, but how would you describe, or how would you describe what the lease is and the impact it has to the dental office?
I would say it's simply like it's the biggest check you're ever going to write, except you're writing it over a period of time. And the fact that most leases are written not in the doctor's favor, not surprisingly, you don't realize how it adds up if you were to go back and actually crunch the numbers. A well-negotiated lease will save you untold, could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, Eric. Like it's significant.
It's key. You saw my slide before. Mark, how would you describe it? What is a lease?
I have to be honest with you, Eric, really until you guys partnered up with Sinclair, I never really thought of my doctor's leases. I always thought it was just a almost fictitious thing off in the distance that, yeah, the doctor has a lease. Well, of course he has to have a lease. He doesn't own the space, so he writes this check every month. The lease, I didn't realize until I met you how much money gets tapped into that lease that doesn't need to be in that lease. I mean, we talked a lot of times to doctors about, putting a budget together for technology for your practice, because, what's the difference between a struggling person and a well-off person? Well, they buy assets, and, you need to have a budget to buy those assets. And if those assets are some technology for your practice that's going to increase revenue, why not unlock it from your lease? Why pay it into your lease every month when you can pay it to yourself and actually put it into an asset and make even more revenue off of
it? It's a refreshing way of looking at it. I think part of it is, you're right, guys. It is the most underappreciated, undervalued, and concerning part, but it is the largest check that you will write to any individual or professional entity in your personal and professional life, bar none. Right. And look, even if we look at the Edmonton market, I was on the phone with one of our local broker partners there today, and over 85% of the market is leased. Right. And the 15% that's for sale is a full strip mall for $12 million. So it's tough, right? It's tough to find a space and make it work. But of course, right, most young dentists and buyers are looking for ground floor retail, right? And again, a great resource to help make sure that you're looking at it a little different. And your next renewal, that you're signing your renewal in between patients, give it a shake and say, my God, this is exactly what, don't sign it, because it's as if you're signing another $1 million paycheck, literally in between patients, signing on an amendment or, annual renewal period. And what a great opportunity to be a landlord. All they do is say, okay, hey, we went from $22 per square foot to $23 per square foot, right? But in the analysis, and we have that in our software, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So don't underestimate your importance there. So the lease, right? The lease either makes a rock solid concrete foundation to your practice, or a crumbling shell that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road. Cost and build outs today, Mark, building out per square foot in Vancouver for clients, etc. What are some of those initial costs, startup costs, building costs, build out costs per square foot, etc.? Give us a quick sense for what you're seeing in the market today.
Right now, our build out contracting costs are running somewhere, if you can get it around $300 a square foot, you're doing very well. It's probably going to be more. Not to mention the time, permits, engineer drawings, everything that goes along with building a practice is taking a lot longer. And I think that, Eric, that's one of the things that you and I have had long conversations over is, people saying, oh, I'm going to sign a lease. And it's okay. They gave me a month free lease, or they gave me a couple of months to do fixturing, and they think, well, that's great. Well, hang on, this is not to simplify, but this is dental. It's not a law office where you throw a couple of desks in there, throw a few phones on them, and lock the door, and you got a law office. This is a dental office. We have heat, we have electricity, we have water, we have vacuum, we have suction, and then for fun, we throw in radiation. It's not easy. And you need time to get all that done, and you need time to get it all done properly. And all of that, if you're building a brand new office, is something that's very, very time consuming, very expensive. And if you don't have it in your lease, like Eric said, you start writing a check for something that's not generating any revenue yet. So have a professional negotiate that lease to make sure you get what you need.
So let's pause on that for a second. So timeline wise, because this is a top question we get, and I'm sure going to get in the Q&As, but from a timeline wise, right? We talk about some of these hidden clauses and relocations, demolitions, these types of things, right? Mark, if you had a doctor call you, one of the hundreds you've helped out over the years and built out the practice like the one we were just touching on, and says, hey, Mark, I've got a relocation notice. I've got to be out in 3 months or 2 months or otherwise, right? What's an average time or demolition, right? All over West Vancouver, we've been co-traveling up and down, right? What's involved, and what's an average time frame if you were to describe to a doctor to pick up and move that dental practice across the street, right, or down the road?
In other words, to build a brand new dental practice?
Yeah.
We optimistically used to say it's like having a child. It's going to be about 9 months. But right now, the conditions are, I would say a year is conservative. And we've had a lot of projects take longer than that. You don't have to have much of a blip in the permit process, in getting engineered drawings done. Quite honestly, we've had problems with neighbors. And anything like that is easily going to run you up. Honestly, if a doctor comes to me and says, I'd like to build an office soon, I start with which year?
Yeah, and that's perfect timing. So what I did here, as we're touching on it, right? We'll customize some of the content here for this evening. So number one is a couple of polls, right? As mentioned, that you should be able to see on your screen. Again, what best describes your situation, right? Do you own or do you lease your space? And we'll start digging into a few of those, right? Lease coming up for expiry, buy or new, etc. You should be able to see that poll pop up there. Steve, same questions, right? As you're seeing it throughout Ontario, you've been involved with how many build outs would you say over the years, Steve?
Oh, geez, hundreds. It's maybe be more. The thing Mark touched on, the timelines are so much longer than people anticipate. Sometimes it's getting a material, and people think, oh, I can't get my equipment. It isn't that. Sometimes it's a tile you've ordered from Italy, or it's, it could be furniture. It could be anything. I will say that pre-pandemic, 9 months was not a bad number. We could sometimes even get it done less than that. But after pandemic, and certainly during the whole time, it was not uncommon, Mark, for us to have gear in our warehouse for over a year. So a year plus another, period of time, I can think of one office, literally it was over 2 years before it was from start to finish, just for all kinds of reasons. It's a little better now, but it's certainly tough. The other thing Mark touched on is space is really not easy to find. And, the data that you've invested in that software, any dentist who sees it is blown away, because they're often spending time on their own trying to find space. And 9 times out of 10, they find, oh, there's a great space, and they find out it's already taken. You can get in early. You didn't show it on there, but I know you can actually show pre-build information where they haven't even broken ground. But here's what's coming. And if your timeline is long enough, that could make perfect sense.
Yeah, look, it's key points. And you touch on really some of the key themes. Part of this is exactly that. It's look, being prepared, and any minute you're not spending chairside is a time suck. And yes, anytime a doctor tries to go on MLS or Googling or, going out and trying to knock on doors on the weekend and, calling the number on the sign of an office building, it is such an inefficient use of time, because there could be a relocation clause, there could be a demolition clause, there could be anything here that could be incredibly difficult, and could have, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars of impact to your situation. Mark, Dad?
I just as an FYI for all of you dentists out there that are thinking about it, the minute you think of locating to a space, But even before you even phone the guy to say, can I come in and look at it? You need to phone the city and you need to ask about zoning. Make sure you're in the right zoned area. It doesn't matter. Don't take any outside person. Certainly don't take the leasing agent's word for it. Just phone the city, say, this is what I'm looking at. I'd like to know if it's zoned for healthcare. And when they say yes, put a note on my file that says I phone. It is the best thing you could ever do. It sounds so simple, but every Sinclair rep that you ever deal with, the first thing they're going to ask you is it zoned properly?
Yeah. And just to add some relevance here as we dig through some of these and we get into our practical half on the back half here. 96% have a lease, one owns, so I'll skip over that pretty quickly. 25% planning to open or relocate their practices. One's planning to acquire, 4% is planning to acquire, 25 planning to transition, 29% planning to stay, renegotiate, and then from there, most leases are coming due within the next sort of 2 to 5 years. And 24% planning to buy or start a new practice. So just a quick overview there. Perfect, great. So from that perspective, shifting gears a little bit here. So yeah, look, it's so important, and it's as we've seen, incredibly expensive to move, and can absolutely impact 100% of your practice sale proceeds. Because if the landlord finds a reason to say no, or even better, or even worse, to terminate the lease just for asking to sell the clinic and engage directly with the buyer, can be absolutely devastating. So again, that's why it's important. I wanted to share a few things of how we look a little differently about the financials. And the goals of this is to keep as much money as you can in your pocket. So we won't belabor it, but base rent goes without saying. Have as many data points as possible to compare, to make sure that your team and your lease negotiator has all of that local data to make sure that you know what is fair and factual. And again, when your landlord wants you to renew, what a beautiful time to renegotiate. Don't just sign that option to renewal, right? Renegotiate. Annual increases. Some landlords are being squeezed, right? I was on the phone with one of the big national banks today, and a lot of their clients are landlords. And a lot of these landlords are getting massive increases to their debt, right? Based on interest rates. So again, if you're standing at your practice, you look to your left, you look to your right, who do you think the landlord's going to try to squeeze at, at renewal time? Is it the florist that might be 2 or 3 months behind and still catching up from COVID? Is it the nail salon, right? Or is it the multi-million-dollar dental practice? So be aware of that and start early. And then be aware of all the other key financial negotiables, right? Common area maintenance. That can be upwards of 50% of your base rent, especially for those nice ground floor retail, that everybody wants. Fixturing and free rent. This is a key piece. So, Mark, you had a couple of comments on this earlier, but be cautious of follow the money, if you will, right? We know that, right, we're paid directly by the landlord, by you, the tenant, right? Brokers paid by the landlord, right? And therefore, just make sure you've got someone else looking at it from your perspective to help ensure that you're squeezing every potential dollar of that. And for example, you're not taking tenant improvement allowance. Tenant improvement allowance sounds great, but it's a little bit like fool's gold, right? Is it $10,000? Is it $100,000? Again, the landlords aren't in the lending business. One way or another, you're paying for it. Let it be base rent, annual increases, additional CAM fees, or a lot less, fit up or free rent period. Anything else to add there, gentlemen? You guys have seen lots of these over the years and lots of cost go out. Anything else to add?
There is no free rent. You're paying for it eventually. So I know dentists often get excited because they got so much time of free rent, but you might have been able to get a better deal with less of that. Or sometimes it does make sense depending on cash flow, but just be aware it's not free.
And you've helped position a lot of this to landlords. Similarly, Steve, why are dentists the best tenants? The The brokers, the landlords are the first to say, oh my God, Dr. Jeffrey, I got 3 other dentists that are going to sign up for this tomorrow. You better sign up right now or else, right? Oh boy, right? I just talked to a doctor.
Yep.
She was devastated at your branch the other day because it was still a plot of she signed a year and a half ago, a binding letter of intent. It's still dirt. And she's still waiting to come in. I think she's already ordered her gear and it's just waiting to come through, and it's still dirt today. How would you phrase that again to one of your clients and a doctor about their value to a landlord?
So I think one of the things that dentists don't often realize is that they are the world's best tenants. They generally don't have any issues paying. They're investing a ton in the space. They don't likely move. I mean, what was the stat, Eric, you shared recently about restaurants? 90-something% do not make it to 10 years. Like,
yeah, it's staggering, right? The dentists, we're talking default rates, right? Their default rates after a 10-year for a dentist, right? Typically less than 1%, about 0.5. Yeah. Right. And yes, restaurants, well over 90% default rates.
I thought that was the restaurant secret, is you don't buy a restaurant till it's been bankrupt 3 times.
So you're right. I mean, again, you look at dentists, they are one of the best, the highest build-out costs on the planet, the lowest default rates. You're there for 26 and a half years. Yeah. And more importantly, you're COVID proof. You can't work from home. Right. So, little tongue in cheek there, but it really does help to frame yourself that don't underestimate how important you are, right? And we'll touch on some of the key components here is have your cake and eat it too, because this is what the landlord's metrics look like. And when they look at you, they see a dollar sign, right? And that's okay. It's a for-profit business, right? But realize what the landlord sees and how do you leverage that. And again, it's base rent, it's annual increases. So just a simple $5,000 per month rent without even factoring in additional rents, probably an extra $2,500 a month, just assuming a 3% annual increase. And now these days we're seeing CPI, we're seeing 5, we're seeing 6, we're seeing whatever, right? Just the first 10 years alone is almost $700,000, not including another $200,000 or $300,000 for the additional rents. Year 11 to 20 is another $974,000. So just over the first 20 years of your career, right? That's just base rent of $1.6 million. And especially considering the practice, you or your buyer are there even longer, right? 30 years, it's over $3 million, just base rent alone, right? So again, the goal of tonight is not to make us all leasing experts, but to just reframe how important and how every dollar that you're spending is leverage and should make sure that it's not just you versus the landlord on a teeter-totter. The landlord's heavy on the bottom, you're up there dangling your feet in the air, right? We're here to help level out the playing field. So, right, you're getting the maximum value from your negotiation. Now, I wanted to spend some time on this, guys, and this is something you are a big sort of proponent on here, is things that go well, but also some of the pitfalls of the hundreds you've both done for startups or even acquiring a practice, right? Gentlemen, maybe Mark, to kick it off, what are some key best practices here? Let it be for a startup or let it be for a practice acquisition. Give us a sense of key things you've seen and how the attendees can help protect themselves on it.
Well, I think the thing you have on your practice guide here is not number one just as the first thing you should do, but it's also the first thing you should do as a priority, is to create a business plan. And this is another area, by the way, where a lot of you are very uncomfortable. You went to dental school and congratulations, you got in and you got through, but you didn't go to get a degree in accounting, and you didn't go to get a degree in business, and you didn't learn how to write a business plan. Engage someone. There's a lot of us that are out there that are willing to help with assets that can help, but having that business plan, it ranks right up the same thing. We do a little thing out here when we're designing a dental office called space calculation, and we actually have a 2 or 3 page And I'm happy to share it with anyone who wants it. My email's, at the end, you can get it. And you just kind of go through and you write down what you think you want in a dental practice, and then it calculates all the square footage. And I actually get a lot of fun out of it, because usually I hand it to someone and they'll go through it and they'll write it all down. And at the end of it, before they add it up, I go, okay, so is this going to be the dream square footage or the reality square footage? And they go, oh, no, I think I was pretty accurate. I go, it's pretty okay, good, let's add it up. And it comes out to some number, like say 3,000 square feet. And I go, and you know what the rent's going to be on that? And that's going to be that. And they go, oh, okay, well, maybe I don't need the photo studio. Maybe I don't need and I have to admit, out here in Vancouver, things like the consult room that sits empty for hours and hours every day, and the children's area that's, nothing more. That kind of has gone away. So creating that business plan, and we always say, make your plan and then plan your work. You've got to have that initial plan. All of that's going to follow up to getting the right team, to getting the right site, getting the right designer, then a right negotiator. All of that will follow, but you've got to have that business plan. And please make it a reality. Don't put your dreams in there. Eric, I mean, one of the things that has been so impressive with Cirrus is the amount of data that we've been able to access around. You saw Eric quickly scroll through some of those things. What's really neat is to look at how many households, how many people per household, and what the average age is of those households. And, in certain areas, those households, there's between 4 and 6 people. The average age is under 40. Well, those are families, and, they're moving to the areas. There's a ton of data out there, and use that data in your business plan.
Okay. Steve, anything else to add? You're just muted, Steve.
Sorry. I think especially when you're starting a practice, the difficult part is you're worried about all the things that you can't control. Can I find space? Which equipment am I going to buy? How am I going to do marketing? How do I find staff? There's a million things that how do I get a good contractor? How do I make sure I can build in the zoning is correct? I think that then the number 2 on there is such a critical thing, is build a team. Don't do it by yourself. It's not the amount of stress is just not worth it when there's so many really smart, capable people that if you just ask around, you will find good people who will often refer you to other good people, and build a team. That would include your lawyer, your accountant, your equipment specialist. You're going to look at Eric, of course, obviously making sure your lease is right, contractors. These are all people that when working together can really accelerate your timeline and reduce your stress. The best thing a dentist can be doing is dentistry. All these other things are things you need to do, but they're not things that you're experts in. And your best bet is to try to find people that are willing to help and get them engaged and let them do their thing to make it as seamless for you as possible.
We did a 3-hour event the other day at the event. One of the doctors at the end said, "Oh my God, I had no idea that these people existed. We've been dealing with this. Our contractor didn't submit plans, right? We're waiting. We've been paying 8 months of rent now. Nothing's been done. Nothing's been built out. And I had no idea that any of these sort of specialists existed." So, and you'd be shocked at how much that Mark, Steve, myself, etc., have conversations with doctors for hours on end. We're not billing time, right? We're helping to give some guidance, right, and help make sure that you've got the right solution, moving forward. So on that note, I won't talk too much about those of you that own your own buildings, but for those of you that do, it's just as important to have a lease to separate your real estate corporation from your practice corporation. That's taxes, right? Ottawa and the thousands and thousands of CRA auditors, right? Paying from one pocket to the other, make sure it's fair market rent, liability, slips and falls. And you want to make sure that you've protected your building asset as well as your practice. And heaven forbid you were to ever pass away, it becomes devastating if, again, there isn't a clear lease and a clear payment separating those two entities. Before we get to some Q&As, what I wanted to focus on here was a few things. Number one is how to avoid some $100,000 mistakes. So on that note, take a second now. This clause is a classic, but have a read and try to find where any or all of the red flags are here. Okay. What did you find first? Any volunteers? Steve, Mark? So this section, to take a step back, this section can be great for the tenant, right? And okay for the landlord, but it gives the tenant the ability to renew the lease. So if you've got a 10-year term and 2 5-year options, this section is what governs how that works, right? How much leverage you have, or if you can run into the situation where you might even lose them. So Mark, Steve, anybody that wants to take the first crack? What's the first red flag that a doctor might not be aware of?
I was going to look at the no event shall it be less than the rent paid in the last year of the original term.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Anything
Why
before
can't
that,
the
Steve?
rent go down?
If the tenant and landlord are unable to agree on the market rent within 60 days, you know, that's who's agreeing.
There's one I don't even understand. Okay. Any such renewal shall be on the landlord's then current standard form lease at a minimum rent to be determined between the what is that?
Okay, so let's start at the beginning and go down. These are great questions. Number one, why would this be an issue? Provided that Dr. Joe Black shall remain as the tenant.
Back to set.
Now you've got to put yourself in the landlord's shoes and put your landlord hat on. Let's say, right, I want Dr. Wilson as my tenant. I will give Dr. Wilson a 10-year term and 2 5-year options. But if he sells to Dr. Jeffrey, I don't know if I like the cut of Dr. Jeffrey's jib.
Smart.
I want to be able to, right, say no, right? If Dr. Wilson sells to Dr. Jeffrey, right, I want to be able to structure something brand new for Dr. Jeffrey. And why should I did the options for you. I didn't do it for someone else. I, as the landlord, want complete control. And therefore, yes, that means that the options are personal. This can be devastating from a buyer's perspective. You might think you've got a 2 years left and 2 5-year options, and that's 12 years, and that's how much the buyer needs, and the bank's good. But the bank now realizes they've been burned enough times that, hang on a second, 2 years in, the landlord could easily say, no, we're not assigning those options. Right. So that one little clause can be fine for you, but make sure that these options should be transferable to your buyer. Right. So transferable options becomes incredibly important, because when you go to sell your clinic and it's $1.2 million and you've been quoted at 1.5, fantastic. Right. However, if there isn't sufficient term on the lease, right, RBC, Scotia, etc., typically the rule of thumb is, if there's not 12 years worth of term, the buyer can't get a 12-year amortization payback period. So if you're selling, some think, oh, I'll just go month to month. That couldn't be worse. If you plan to sell your practice, including, right, your space and the keys, right, these types of clauses become critical. Okay. How about this one?
And I would just add, Eric, to that, if you talk to any of the brokers, the main reason things don't close is leases.
It's a key one. How about this? Why is this an issue? If the tenant duly has regularly paid its rents, performs its covenants and obligations, and has not been in default. Default is a defined term. So there was a devastating example of a young doctor. She built out a beautiful clinic. It was the end cap, lots of natural light. It was the last one in a nice little strip mall, right? She negotiated a lease, right, with her as she went through the process. Didn't have much help through the process. Got in there, was a perfect tenant, paid all her rent on time, didn't call the landlord for plumbing issues and other little things. She just did it all herself, right? And when she started the process early, she went to renew her lease 2 years prior to expiry, which is the right thing to do. The landlord wrote back and said, no, your remaining 2 options are null and void because we found you in material default of your lease, and therefore, right, you will be out at the end of your initial term. She sat there and she said, same expression Mark's looking at. Why? This is nuts, right? So she hired us. We reached out to the landlord and we said, look, we don't get it. What are we missing here? And the landlord said, you know what? I'll send you a photo. I said, okay. Got the email. It was a photo. It was a photo of the doctor's front door. What was in that photo?
Suspense is killing us.
Well, some guesses from a lot of these CE courses, one of them particularly is, oh, well, maybe it's another doctor's name. And that can be, right? Most leases do not allow for another independent T4A independent contractor, specialist, ortho, endo, perio, pros, OMS to come in once or twice a month on a revenue split, because you're basically bringing in an outside business to generate revenue. So yes, that in some cases could be used in default or used to increase rent. So you need to have an associates clause, a dental specific language to your lease, right? That's for another time. In this particular case, it was of her hours of operation. Monday, Tuesday,
Yeah.
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, admin day, closed, right? And open every second Saturday. In the lease agreement, which is common when you have big anchor tenants, right? The big box stores, etc., they will put minimum hours of operations clause hidden away in Article 76, subsection 2. But it basically said unit must be opened, must have merchandise, must be staffed and lit, right? Monday through Saturday through these particular hours. And that was the loophole. That was the reason why they forced that doctor, and she had to move across the street, all because of, right, the photo of her front door and the minimum hours of operations clause. So the takeaway here, and what was it after all? It was a coffee shop. The coffee shop was willing to pay top dollar and wanted that space, and the landlord's agents sat in the room and figured out exactly how they could get that to be a reality.
And default's a big, like you say, it's a legally defined term and it's long.
Correct. So part of it is to know what's within the lease. So this, Mark, was your question. What the heck is this? Any such renewal shall be on the landlord's then current standard form lease. So let's say, Mark, you negotiate a hell of a 10-year term. You remove the demolition clause. You remove the relocation clause. Everything was perfect, right? You remove your personal guarantees. You didn't have to return it to pre-dental condition. This little section is the landlord's. You ever play Monopoly? You get the little get out of jail free card, right? That's it. So then whatever good work you did to update, amend, and renegotiate that lease, every time you renew the lease, the landlord can dust off something from scratch and say, aha, good news. Here's a brand new lease with a demolition kicking in day one.
Yeah. And
everything that you just created, right, is gone. That was my Bell contract. That's okay. Okay, so moving forward. And this is another one, right? In no less shall it be less than at the end of the original term. So most doctors don't realize, I'll sign it now, I'll figure it out later. Most leases are the world's most boring roller coaster. It only goes up in one direction for the first 10 years. For the following 5, it says, yeah, sure, you can renegotiate, but it'll never be less than it was at year 10. So that means regardless, you're going up for the next 5 and then the next 5. So without knowing it, how some of these doctors are overpaying in rent is because it just kept on going up and up, and no one has gone through the process to renegotiate. So most clients were advising not to exercise the option. Far better to negotiate a new 5 or 10-year term, right, than just to simply exercise an option, knowing that when you do go to sell, the more term you have, right, the more leverage, right, and the more attractive it is for buyers, and the easier it is for them to get financing. And last but not least, a little trick is if they've given a bunch of other tenants tenant improvement allowance and all the rents are higher, well, now suddenly it's the rising levels raise all ships, and that can dramatically impact your second largest hit to overhead, which is your tenancy expense. So one little clause, right, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of risk.
Crazy.
This is one, as we wrap here, right? This one particular clause, this is from a doctor that was pre-pandemic, right? It was his friend was the landlord, or what he thought was his friend was the landlord, right? He did an initial 5-year term, right, with 2 5-year options, and thinking, hey, that's fine, right? And then he's practicing away, and he's working, he's finally starting to pay off some debts, etc. And then he gets this brown envelope posted to his door. He opens it up, right? And here's an excerpt. Dear Dr. Smith, right, as you know, your lease expires November 14th of 2018. Pursuant to section 2.4 of your lease, you had an option to renew your lease for 5 years at market rate. However, you're required to give me written notice of your intention to renew, but no later than 6 months prior to the expiration of your current lease term. By my calculation, you were required to give written notice no later than May 14th of May 28, which you did not do. By the way, this was sent on May 17th. Right. Please be advised that my broker will be placing a for lease sign in a conspicuous but non-intrusive place on your premises next week. Right. And he'll only show the premises to prospective clients during business hours. Oh, great. Right. Just as your chair side, you're going to have a wandering walkthrough of other tenants to look at it. Of course, if you still want to stay, have your people call my people, right, at a dramatically higher rate. So this is the 2 things to put in your phone this evening, doctor, wherever my phone is number 1, right? When does your lease expire? And then, quite frankly, more importantly, what is your option to renew deadline? That is the date that you must give written notice to the landlord if you choose to stay or want to stay in the space or to exercise that option. And that is the date that is missed more often than not. And do you think the landlord's going to proactively remind you? Absolutely not.
Eric, in my conversations with clients, almost none of them know when their lease is up. Even the big, like, I've got another 3 years or 5 years, or they don't know. So it's worth digging that up, and as Eric says, putting it in your phone, because missing it can have catastrophic results.
And that's a perfect piece, right? So one of the best solutions here is to start early. So we always suggest at least 24 months in advance of renewing your lease, or typically 5 to 10 years prior to transitioning and selling, start the process early. By the way, landlords are taught this as well, to increase their profit without a penny of additional expense. How? To simply run out the clock. Every time, right, they find an excuse or they delay or defer, and suddenly, whoops, it's 24 months now, you're busy again. Whoops, now it's 12 months. Suddenly it's 9 months. Whoops, you've now missed your option to renew deadline. Right now, suddenly you're 3 months out, and the landlord comes in and hits you with a 22% rent increase. What do? Every day, doctors are put in that situation where suddenly, shoot, I've got 2 months left. The landlord wants a price increase. I have no ability to move or relocate. I've left it too late. I've got no leverage. I guess I better just sign, right? And that is one of the easiest ways that landlords are increasing their profitability without a penny of additional expense, all by running out the clock. So what's the process? Start early, right? Understand the hidden terms within your lease. These are just a few, but Steve, this is an epidemic throughout Toronto, but demolitions, relocation provisions. What does that mean to you and your ability to help your clients?
Well, it's a huge mess because everything's being redeveloped, especially in the GTA. and doctors get notification, hey, sorry, we're putting up a condo, we're taking this building down, putting up a 5-time bigger building, and all of a sudden it's like, what? And it's rampant, to your point.
In addition, relocation. Some doctors just, it's a did you know, the relocation provisions. In some cases, it gives the landlord the right to pick up and move you to any other unit in the mall, building, or even complex, or in some cases, even any other building that the landlord owns in the province, believe it or not. And they can move you, in many cases, with as little as 2 to 3 months worth of notice, right? And depending on how it's written, right, the landlord, I had one the other day, the landlord's going to cover 100% of the build-out costs up to a maximum of 2 months worth of base rent, $10,000.
Such decent folks.
One big takeaway as we go to the Q&As here, Mark, Dad?
I wanted to sort of just ask you and sort of give, we've had, obviously, Vancouver is the same with demolition clauses. They seem to be more of a gamble almost than anything else. We've had situations where people have said, oh, that's okay, I've got a demolition clause, I've got a year to move. But then once the clause get exercised, and you tell me if this is consistent, the clause get exercised and the guy thinks, okay, I've got a year to move. And then all of a sudden the landlord came along and said, we've decided to change. Instead of giving you a year to move, we're giving you 6 months to move, but we'll forgive you 6 months rent. And in one case, we had someone that came along and they said, you know what, we've decided that we need you out in like 3 months. So you need to be gone in 3 months, but we'll forgive you the 6 months of the rent, and you don't have to give it. How does that even happen?
Well, it's as I was watching with my my kids the other day, right? The good old Pixar movie Up, right? You've got the one old fella around all the new developments, right? If you're the last linchpin keeping a 65-story tower from going up above you, trust me, right? There's a team of lawyers, developers, etc., to try to find any way to make that faster. So we had an incredible experience for a doctor. We we negotiated a $1.1 million check from the landlord to the doctor just so he didn't exercise his options, which was an incredible win. But as a result, right, to answer your question, is the lease becomes incredibly important, and the value and the term and the options and the length of that lease is great leverage. And yes, demolition clauses can and are negotiated, right? Same as relocation clauses, right? If the landlords are dead set that it's going to be in there, okay, great. But there can be blackout periods. There can be all sorts of revisions. It can be based on different timelines, notifications, etc., right? And then clearly defining what occurs at that point. Relocation clauses, for example, they could just say it's 3 months. Have a nice day. Yeah. Right. And my concern there is what's the blackout period? It's not even the lack of production, but what's the risk that if you're shut down in 3 months and it takes you another 6 months to open again? It's not even the lack of production, it's the patient attrition, which can easily be, we've seen upwards of 8.5% for every month that you're shut down, right? And they go down the street and they don't come back. So yes, when the landlord says no to changing or amending any of these things, and these are just some of the clauses we negotiate, right? Any one of these can be negotiated and can certainly be advantageous to the doctor. Death and disability, the last one I'll really touch on here is to protect yourselves, doctors, right? There's a devastating example of a doctor who was 43 years of age, right? Built out a beautiful 6-operatory practice, one that fell under your umbrella, Steve. And unfortunately, 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, he died of a massive heart attack. Fully built out clinic, no doctor, no patients. How much is that practice worth? Unfortunately, zero, in this case, less than zero. The reason why, right, we're here tonight is we're passionate about it because this, unfortunately, lease was signed personally and was binding to the doctor's successors and heirs. The landlord then went back to the spouse and said, unfortunately, Mrs. Smith, you're now responsible for the roughly $9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease. Had there been some dental specific language in the lease, such as a death and disability clause, could have given the doctor, right, the ability, and their spouse, the ability just to say, no, right, here's my 2-month, 3-month demolition or death and disability, right, I'm terminating my lease and I'm walking away. It's almost like a life insurance policy that didn't cost a penny. So these are just some of the dozens and dozens of things that that's important to know is hidden in your lease. One of the best ways to win as we wrap here is, number one, get all the facts and figures. Make sure that you have a lease that's signed and countersigned by your landlord. If it's just signed by you, it's not worth the paper it's written on. Make sure you have the original lease as well as any amendments, riders, or if you bought the clinic and it's assigned, that lease from 1986 from Dr. Wilson back then is still the governing document today. Right? You then want to identify, what's my long-term goals and plans? Right. Number 3, have your lease reviewed for the risks, get the market rate data, rental rates, demographics, etc. Have the strategy and development. Then, right, but don't. What happens when most people get to number 5, right? They skip, they get through and they say, Mark, great webinar last night. Great seeing you again, sir. It's been fantastic since you built up my clinic 20 years ago. And you know what? I just called my landlord this morning and I said, let's start negotiating the lease. And skipped sections 1 through 5 and goes right to picking up the phone. Don't do that. Make sure to take the proper steps. No different to walking into a surgery, right? Coming off the golf course, right? You want to be prepared. You want to have all the 7 steps done in advance and then negotiate the financial, then negotiate the business clause, right? And don't stop till you get to a final form lease agreement. In appreciation of everyone's time, and based on the partnership we've secured with Sinclair, we are offering a complimentary lease review in appreciation for everyone's time this evening. So what we'll do is do the rental rates, do the demographics, do a similar type of sort of Zoom or Teams call or phone call and walk you through where the red flags are, talk about your plan and vision, right? And then also, more importantly, helping to make sure that you've got a proper strategy through your eventual transition. I'll pull up a poll here now to give everybody the opportunity to run through. In addition to that, I know there's lots of questions. I know we've gone through, some pretty wild times. Hopefully today this gives us a better perspective of the importance of the lease. It talks about the buying versus leasing. It talks about growth, which is fantastic. My God, what a great time to be a dentist. I know it might not feel that way, but look, the article in the Globe and Mail recently said that it's the best time since 1994 to be a tenant as it pertains to office real estate. Fantastic. And good news, right? If you saw the other, which the landlords have, the fee guides, right? Everybody's getting a raise, apples to apples. So it's fantastic that you've weathered the storm. Now it's about being proactive. It's about how to protect yourself. It's about how to be informed, have the right data, and to make sure that you've got your right team around you. On that note, we'll touch on some Q&As. I see lots of poll results come in. Additional final thoughts, Mr. Wilson.
Actually, Eric, I think you've summed it up really well. I really can't believe it with that offer of a free lease evaluation that everybody's not going to take you up on that.
We appreciate it. And even if you don't have a lease and it's just more of a conversation about life, maybe you're thinking of buying, maybe you're thinking of building a new clinic, right? It's a perfect piece to go through. Also, Mark had mentioned the square footage analysis tool. I've added a section at the very bottom, number 5. Yes, I would like to hear from Mark, Stephen, or my local Sinclair representative for some more information, right? Looks like right now 65 of you have said yes for that. So yeah, happy to circle through and get that information back to Mark and Steve's teams across Canada and make sure. And if you do want that practice guide, we can certainly facilitate that from question number 5 as well. Again, for those of you curious about the lease review, demographics, rental analysis, that's question 4. And looks like, again, if you are, one last piece that I didn't mention before, if you are month to month, about 12% of you that are in a month to month lease, that is something you really want to take cost and caution with. You might think it's great, right? Steve, I get to sell my clinic and you know what, I'm a month to month tenant. But if the landlord wakes up tomorrow for whatever reason and puts a brand new lease in front of you with demolitions, relocations, etc., or even worse, says, you know what, I'm done, right? And here's your 30 days note and you're out. You might think, oh, well, I've been fine for the past 32 years. I should be okay again. Why on God's green earth would you take that risk?
Don't do it.
So for the roughly 11% of you that are in a month-to-month lease or your lease is expired, right, that is certainly a top priority for me to connect with you. And it gives you a lot of leverage, right? Let's look on the glass half full. I'm a big optimist, right? If you're not locked into something, then that gives you a great opportunity to start something from scratch, right? A new 10-year term, 2 5-year options, and design it around your buyer. Keep the term for you, keep the options for your buyer. Throwing it out to some Q&A, right? Looking through some Q&A here. Steve, first question, right? What's the top mistake or frustration you see from a mid-career doctor, would you say?
Tough one. I mean, if you're a mid-career dentist, you know, there's it's often said that most dentists do 2.5 offices in a career. So the question is, where are they with that? You touched on it, you know, if their lease is coming up for renewal, you know, does the current facility meet their wants, wishes, and dreams of what they thought it would be? You know, my experience seems to be that a lot of times it's no, I actually don't like my space and I've outgrown it, and there's things that I would change if I could, but I can't. And that's a great opportunity to have the discussion about, well, maybe we should see if there's another space available or something that gives them, you know, or her, whatever, you know, I guess trying to do the right word, but, you know, finding something that actually marries up with who they are today. Because I guarantee that if you built a practice 10 years ago, it's not the same as who you are today.
So,
Great point. One question on design, Mark.
yes.
From a design perspective, I'm looking for a new location. When do I engage a designer, right? And my local representative?
Yesterday, the day before you decided to look. And I'll tell you why. Because you're going to want that space to be looked at. It's great to look at a space and say, like you were saying, Eric, the corner unit had lots of light and all this, that, and the next thing. But we also want to make sure it's got a 2-inch water supply. We've got to make sure it's got enough electrical to run all the electrical that we run in dental. We're going to want to know, is it slab on grade? Is it over a parking lot? Can we core? Can we trench? All that kind of stuff. Some of them are just deal killers. We have a situation right now where we have a client who signed a lease on a space and has delayed so much, and it's a 3rd floor place, and he was told he could core through the ceiling into the unit below. And unfortunately, the people that have now signed the lease on the unit below have said, no, we want to have an open ceiling. We don't want your pipes coming through there. So no, we don't want that. And we're now having to raise the whole clinic 6 inches to put everything underneath it. So when do you engage with the person that's going to be the design? Right away. We also do another little thing called a test fit, where if someone will send us their CAD file of the place, well, it's not going to be. It gets married up with that space calculator. You say, Mark, I'd like to have 4 ops. Can I put 4 ops in 1,200 square feet? Maybe. What are you willing to give up to do it? Can I put 5 ops at 1,800 square feet? Sure. But what's the shape of the unit? What's the, you know, don't tell me it's 1,800 square feet and then I find out it's in a T shape or an L shape or, right, you know, some crazy, you know, shape
rentable
like
versus usable. It's a key point.
Rentable versus usable. You know, how high, you know, there's just, get your design people right away. Let them come over. Even if the design person might even bring a contractor with them and just sort of say, you know, this is going to be hard, this is not going to be hard, whether sometimes you have to do x-ray to find out what's underneath through slab bands. A lot of new building techniques are happening. Post-tensioning is happening, which is a way of building a building where you essentially, they're hanging, the floors are sort of a hanging concrete slab, and it's great, but it's got rebar all through it. We don't know where it is, and there's certain places you can't go. I think anybody lately who's looked at any kind of condominiums in an apartment, I happen to be looking out the window of mine right now at the building across the street, and I know it's post-tension because there's a great big column right in the corner of their living room on every floor. Well, guess what? You might not be able to do anything for 3 feet around that. 3 feet around that thing might be 60 square feet. You know, these are the reasons. Yeah, you want to get your design person involved very early. And if I could just kind of reinforce what Steven said about the middle-aged dentist, but even the young dentist, and wrap it up with design. Really, it's a good thing to give some thought to what your practice is going to portray about you. You have to work there every day. I always tell dentists, you know, we build these beautiful practices. Please, for the first 3 months, will you please go in through the front door, not the back? Because you spent a lot of time coming up with this beautiful office, yet you're sneaking in the back door and going straight into an operatory that looks like an operatory. Let's face it, operatories look the same. But also, it should fit your personality. It should fit your vision, but also the way you want to do dentistry. You know, I always ask dentists when they first come in, and this is how I phrase it, and I know a lot of people are going to mentally do the same thing. I say, doctor, I'm going to ask you a question that 95% of the dentists, when I ask them this question, don't answer the question the way it's asked. They answer the question, and I will tell you this specifically, they answer the question by telling me what they do now. How much more information can I give you? Now, here's the question. Doctor, in your ideal dental operatory, where would you like to get your handpieces from? 95% of dentists tell me, this is where I get them from now. It's not what I asked you. You're building your dream office. You're building your dream practice. Do you want to have the handpiece right here? Are you left-handed? You know, so yeah, get the design. The earlier you can get the design people involved and the equipment people involved, the better the whole thing is going to go.
Fantastic. A few Q&As, additional ones came in. For those that came in late, Dr. E, yes, it is recorded. We will be posting this webinar and following up through there. Yes, not a problem. Dr. F, is the rental market now allows for a high amount of leasehold improvements, or should the dentist expect to put up the entire $300 per square foot? In terms of costs and build-out costs and those type of things, Steve, any quick comments that you've seen from your side of the fence these days?
Again, it goes back to the lease. What you know, it's you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. So I think it depends on the circumstance and it depends on the space. I know that's a wildly unsatisfying answer, but it's kind of what it is. You know, the $300 a square foot, there's wiggle room on there. It depends on what kind of chandeliers you want in your space, or is it, you know, a more meat and potatoes kind of thing. So, you know, there is some room on that as well. But again, you know, it's like Mark said with the designer, you definitely do want to make sure everything you want will fit in that space. But a number of the contractors we work with here, and I'm assuming Mark, it's the same there, you know, give them a call and they'll come take a look at the space and they'll give you a sense of, hey, this is going to be really tough because it's third floor. I got an elevator, everything up, you know, parking for the guys every day. You know, that'll affect your build out as well. You don't think it would, but it does.
I'll go back to about the 6th or 7th slide when we talked about the financial negotiables, Dr. F. The net of it is, again, it depends, but part of it is there's some great examples recently. We've done 3 deals lately where the landlord's covered almost 100% of the build-out costs, and it didn't get, you know, added into additional rent versus what they had already advertised. So that's a big one. To answer your question, in some cases you want to come up with the full $300 per square foot, right? I'll tell you why. I would much rather you get a loan from the bank, know exactly what the payment periods are, know exactly what the interest are, rather than building in 100 grand, 200 grand or more into your lease over the next 5, 10, 15 years. And then we know at the option, it keeps on going up and up and up. I'd much rather you have a clear loan and reduce the lease, base rent, annual increase, lock it in for the first 5 years or more, etc., right? And be able to save, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars more, right, at the end of that 5 or 10 or 15-year type term, because you didn't have that sort of, upfront money backed into the lease. Dr. F, let me know if that didn't answer your question there, but that's, in essence, it depends on your individual situation. And we want to do both, right? Hey, what is it if we took $30, $50 per square foot, right? In tenant improvement allowance, or what if we didn't, right? How much less could we get that down to? Base rent, annual increase, common area maintenance. Think of those all as different valves on the wall. Good, we got to struck some nerve. Thanks, Dr. F. Question, anonymous attendee, what's your take on buying commercial real estate with the current interest rates versus leasing? I'll throw my quick 2 cents out there. Is in our experience right now, it is a great time to be a tenant, and it is a very stressful and difficult time to be a landlord. And therefore, we, not in all cases, right? Retail is a lot more insulated than it is, otherwise. But we looked not too far from where Steve is. There's a building that was fully occupied 3 years ago and now is less than 50%. And actually, in this case, there's some less than 20% occupied. So again, if you're the landlord and you've got a dentist coming in dangling a 10-year term and 2 5-year options, and you've got an empty building, it gives you a ton of leverage. So my point is, explore both, right? Get the value for both. But don't forget, if you're buying the building, you're also becoming the full-time landlord. Is there any other tenants? Is there asbestos, right? You don't have, if your roof leaks, right, or you get a foundation issue, no different than your house, that's on you, right? And if you're a new doctor about to embark on your very first clinic and you're not sure about the location, maybe you were trained overseas, etc., right? And suddenly now you're figuring out, hey, I want to be somewhere in Mississauga, I want to be somewhere in Coquitlam, etc. And suddenly you're pot committed for not only the $1 million loan to build at the practice, but now $1.5 million loan to buy the building. You're locked in.
Yeah.
The typical guidance is start to lease. Start with a 1,200, 1,500 square foot. Start with a 4 or 5 operatory clinic, and then maybe expand into the adjacent suite after 10 or 15 years, right? Or maybe it's a right to purchase down the line, but be cautious about jumping in with both feet. Sure, the banks will, give you all sorts of lending and fight to throw you and give you all sorts with it. But again, should you? And have you really explored what that landlord down the street would be willing to do, right? To lock in a great long-term tenant for great ground floor, grocery anchored, all of that stuff that buyers are really looking for these days. Mark, Steve, anything to add to that one?
I think that's right on.
Yeah, I 100%. I think stick with dentistry. It won't serve you wrong. As maybe on your, the 2.5 offices, if you're up to your 2.0 office, that might be the time to look at it for sure. But I think starting out, it would just be a very difficult scenario to kind of carry it all. And the stress alone would be, 11 out of 10.
Perfect. Great. Let us know if there's any other questions. Any final comments, gentlemen? Thank you so much for your time and your extra time tonight. We appreciate all the great questions. Any final points, Steve?
Again, I just keep harping on the build a team, get folks working for you. Definitely get Eric involved as a starting point. Not only can he help you with the lease negotiations, which literally will save you hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he can also, with the software he's invested in, he's really able to help you find a great space. And don't burn calories trying to find one. Get Eric involved and he can help you find a space that's going to meet your needs today and tomorrow. And then everything else from there, do find a team, build that out. Those are that one piece of advice alone it's going to cost you roughly the same. There's not a lot of savings to be had. Flitting around trying to find a better deal on whether it be a contractor or equipment or whatever. There's certain baked in costs that everybody has, but the stress, you can adjust that pretty significantly.
On that note, all but one stayed all the way through to the Q&A, so we appreciate everybody being on and listening in. Mark, really appreciate that in-depth perspective on design, and we look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. We'll certainly follow up for CEs. Give us about 10 business days in terms of processing those. Certainly for all of you that raised your hand, we'll certainly be in touch with you within the next 24 hours or less. And looking forward to scheduling some calls, reviewing some leases. And thank you so much, Mark and Steve. I'm looking forward to a great long-term relationship with.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to all the participants for taking the time.
Greatly appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.